Hello and welcome to the show with me, Gillian Godsall. Today my guest is Michael Bacina, a solicitor with Piper Alderman in Sydney, Australia. Hello and welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Gillian.
So we've been running your articles on Blockleaders for a while now. There's some really interesting stuff. And you are that most unique unicorn, I think, because you're both a solicitor and also a tech guy. That's quite unusual. I mean, you are a fully fledged, qualified solicitor, but you're a self-taught programmer. How did those two happen?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for carrying some of my stories. It was quite by accident how I became involved in programming. I was a young man at university, and the opportunity came up to get involved in the Wild West days of web design and databasing. So it was really a bit of a seize the day moment for my business partner and I. I was taking a laptop to university back in the days when you had to take an extension cable with you just to be able to have power running. So I used to have a dictaphone to record the class, a Nokia 3210 plugged into a gigantic laptop so I could have my internet, and I won't even tell you how big the phone bill was, and then this extension cable off to the wall. So I was very fortunate in having that trial by fire, and we just had to learn how to program to be able to deliver websites back then. But in that .com craziness, there were no limits. And there were not enough people building things. So I just had to self-teach myself after we had signed up clients so we could deliver.
Wow. So it is interesting because now where you're at the moment, you're all over blockchain in Australia. I mean, you're advising loads of different companies. You're ranked #1 for Fintech law. So you are right at that convergence of finance and blockchain and law. So it's a very interesting space to be in. What is some of your more interesting things that you're doing? Now, tell me about your on different chambers of commerce and stuff like that. Tell me.
Well, I am focused on that digital law space with a particular interest in blockchain. I got involved in blockchain about 3 years ago. So I got to have the excitement of riding the ICO wave and advising a number of very successful Australian projects. I sit on the board of the Canadian Australian Chamber of Commerce. I used to live in Toronto and work in some intellectual property firms there.
So you're in terms of your law, you specialize in business, court and corporate law, bankruptcy, and IP law. So are any of those particularly relevant in the fintech sector and the blockchain sector?
Well, I spent quite a few years doing insolvency law back in the day, and as far as I'm concerned, every business, whether it's SME or larger, has to always be mindful of solvency risk and litigation risk. So spending my formative years as a lawyer, after I exited my startup as a baby lawyer, I did a lot of litigation and almost pure litigation until I slowly morphed into doing more digital style litigation and contracts until kind of took over my practice. So I always view things from the position of how can I tear contracts apart, and knowing how to attack things can certainly help when it's time to build something up. So I kind of approach things from that perspective.
You break it, you deconstruct before you build up again. That's cool.
Exactly.
So I'm just curious then too as well, you write a regular newsletter called Bits of Blocks. How did that come about?
Well, we were rebuilding the Piper Alderman website, and I had always wanted to be putting out more content. I helped in my previous law firm build up their web presence from nothing to putting, I think, about 850% increase in traffic, which wasn't too hard coming from a very small base. So I learned about 7 years ago or so the power of being present on social media. Most lawyers traditionally will put out a learned detail article with a lot of information about a particular area of law, which is very useful for rankings on Google. But it turns out that a lot of clients really want to understand what's going on and know that their lawyers are across the latest happenings in the space. So if you need to be across it anyway, like many people, I learn by doing or learn by writing. So I found that I was always staying across these issues, and I was initially sharing them out on social media, and people liked that. So I thought a better way of digesting it was to actually put out little updates. And then I was fortunate enough that someone inside government had requested that I do a mailer, given that LinkedIn was apparently not playing nicely with some firewalls. So I said, okay, I'll figure out how to do that, and put together just a little weekly mailer so they could have that as well. And then I thought, well, under my principle of just casting a wide net, I would throw that open to anyone and make it an open mailer. I had to move to a separate blog because the amount of content we were producing would have really skewed the search engine optimization for Piper Alderman, which is the oldest law firm in Australia, and certainly having a large volume of content coming out from one practice group versus others would be a bit unbalanced. So I moved that over to my own little branded website while still putting out a weekly update through the Piper Alderman website. So effectively ending up with 2 different mailing lists and a slightly different voice on those articles, and then certainly articles which might be filled out in more detail or summarized in a different way. Certainly things that are relevant for Blockleaders, and I'm very pleased to be able to help put those together to go out in through your channel as well.
It was brilliant, because I think you were mentioning too the difference between solicitors normally putting out great big learned tomes, you know, and very weighty material and very raw, whereas social media is fast and it's swift and it's accessible. So I think that's a brilliant idea, because you're making your learning more accessible to other people via social media, and the bits of blocks is a great medium. So tell me, there's a couple of news stories to touch on briefly. You're talking about Binance. Now, Binance has been in the wars a bit actually as well. I mean, you were writing about the Binance Smart Chain. There's a class action being brought against them in the US as well, against them selling tokens. I don't know, they're calling it the Red Wedding, based on the Game of Thrones episode, if you watched that or are familiar with that. But let me go back. You were writing about Binance, and Binance always very readable and interesting. CZ, what he does. The Smart Chain. You were saying that 2 chains better than 1 chain.
Yes, I do try and put as catchy headlines as I possibly can. So Binance was looking at putting together an independent smart contract capable chain rather than adding smart contract functionality to the existing Binance chain, which is quite sensible because the Binance chain already operates the Binance decentralized exchange, and you don't necessarily want to overly bloat something that's there and works. So by perhaps rather than doing a full new version of that chain, they decided we'll do a separate chain which will have specific elements that it can do well. And anyone who's been involved in programming, of course, knows the more variables you have, or the more you try and build something for one purpose and then change it to another purpose, the more likely things are going to go wrong in a very spectacular way. So we're only at, I think, version 0.1 of the white paper, which was put out a short while ago. And they said that they really grappled with how they wanted to put the smart contract functionality in there, and importantly to say that there would be a bridging relayer so that the Binance coin could be used natively on both chains. And this is also really interesting because the cross-chain linkages that are starting to emerge to help chains communicate, for the most part, are between completely separate chains, whereas this is 2 in-house chains, so they'll be able to have a really tight integration. And that will be fascinating to see how it will be rolled out, so that you can still have all the features running on the Binance chain and then separately have the smart chain optimized and set up for smart contracts. And I suspect there'll be a whole lot of issues of escrow contracts and things like that for storing BNB and perhaps even other tokens that could be put in there, because a lot of cross-chain functionality has been used for wrapping other cryptocurrencies and locking them up in escrow contracts while they're represented on another chain for the purposes of interacting with smart contracts and other dApps on those chains. So it's a really, really interesting development, and Binance having the power and reach that they do means that anything new they put out like this can almost be guaranteed of at least some really good initial adoption, which is a fantastic and dominant place to be in the marketplace.
It is amazing to think it's only, well, they're 3 years old. It's phenomenal. I know I interviewed him about the very start, just before he launched or just maybe shortly after he launched the exchange. And 3 years on, or 2.5 years on, it's phenomenal what he's done in the marketplace. But he's a very smart man, and he's got many years experience. Unlike some of the other startups, he had like 20 years experience of working on exchanges across Asia anyway. So everything he does, I think he's amazing. You had another good story there too as well with Libra. They're now applying for a payments license in the Swiss FINMA. What do you think is happening with the whole Libra project? Do you think it's going to die, or what's your feeling on it?
It's really interesting, and many people got really excited about Libra when it was first announced because it had these really significant long-term goals in mind, and a lot of people who are involved in the sort of the decentralized movement, one camp thought that it was co-opting the movement towards the man and corporatization, and another group thought, well, this is fantastic that a big organization like Facebook is putting its power behind this. Now, I was a member of that camp saying, if Facebook wants to put a huge amount of funding into an open source platform to give away all the code, how can that be anything but a good thing? Because it will just help drive forward the development of better open source, better decentralized systems. Now, they had such an aggressive response, including extraordinary moves by Congress in the US, which was just breathtaking when Congress openly threatened in a letter huge payment providers to say if they stayed involved in the project, they would find themselves under the same level of scrutiny as Libra. Just extraordinary. And even watching those congressional hearings and the Senate hearings in the US, the basic technological concepts that were muddled up and gotten wrong by the senators and congressmen, it just seemed like it was more of an Trumpian audio grabs that they were after and an attempt to beat up Facebook over past privacy problems. But some key changes that happened in the recent letter is to switch to single currency stablecoins. Now, I was a bit embarrassed because very early on I wrote some pieces saying Libra will be single currency stablecoins, and they said no, it will be one, because I always thought, well, it'll just be hard to get usage if you go to buy a coffee, and instead of saying that'll be 5 Aussie Libra, that'll be 8.275 Libra. And that's always been a challenge in my mind to Bitcoin adoption, is outside of hardcore enthusiasts, you don't find people really wanting to be paying for things in a new level other than the price which is on the sticker. And it's one thing to have, for example, a credit card that you can pay for something and it'll automatically pay out of crypto, which interestingly Binance just announced recently, a couple of weeks ago, and we'll be doing just that. So that way you still kind of have an idea, because an app can tell you in real time how much you're actually paying if it's in, for example, Bitcoin. But having a pure system where you're having to find another price is really hard. And I think that a lot of regulators struggled with that as well. So now they're saying they'll offer these single currency stablecoins as well as the original multi-currency coin, which is kind of interesting, because if you look at that in the international context, that's more like the currencies we have now and special drawing rights that exist between nations that use that as a form of accounting, particularly around the United Nations and World Bank. And Libra also said they are going to abandon their transition to a permissionless system. So that, of course, upset a lot of people who are real decentralization champions, saying, well, hang on a minute, now Libra's saying they're not going to be fully decentralized. But I think that was really in a direct response to concerns around money laundering, to say, well, we will always have control. Because I think they found that in meeting with regulators, one massive concern was, well, how are you going to stop people using this for nefarious purposes? And they said,
And
well,
nefarious
we'll
is always the word they chuck in, isn't it? It's not like nefarious.
That's right. And it's always a strange onus of proof, right? Because the whole thing around Libra being attacked was, you were saying, congressmen and senators, prove to us that something you haven't built yet could not possibly be used for an illegal purpose. To which my example was, it's a really good idea that, they didn't do this when sneakers were invented, because one of the first uses for sneakers was probably running away from the police. But we still have sneakers, and we just accept that some of them might be used for crime. And if you said to someone today, sneakers should not be able to be sold to anyone unless they can prove that it'll only be used for an honest purpose, you would get a look back and someone would say, what are you, talking crazy again? Like, some of this stuff is just astonishing, and it makes for a great sound grab to say, in the same way that, the World Health Organization has said, we are unable to confirm that someone cannot catch COVID twice. This is wonderful double negative that's, of course, it's almost impossible to prove. But if you flip it the other way and say we don't have evidence that anyone has caught it twice in any meaningful way, of course it sounds a lot more reasonable. And in the same way, the position should have been put to say, can you ensure, or will you promise to ensure, that the best levels of anti-money laundering and anti-crime will be included in your software development? To which the answer would, of course, be yes. But if you say to someone, can you prove to me, if you said to a bank, can you prove to me that your systems will never be used for evil by a drug dealer or someone who's organized crime? They would say, what are you talking about? Of course I can't stop that. I don't know. We're just an accounting system at some level. We can take all reasonable steps to ensure we know the identity of people, and we can report money laundering in a firm way that ensures that the appropriate agency can follow up illegal behavior. But of course not. In the same way that no internet service provider can ensure that no one is sending a ransom note, or Microsoft can't ensure no one's writing a threatening letter using Word. It's preposterous. So I think the attacks on Libra have been outrageous, and that has unfortunately scared off a lot of their association members, but I think they've got enough people there to push it through. And then there will be a real question of adoption. And that's the real challenge. They already had Facebook dollars at one point that I didn't even know about, because it was so quietly run and killed that no one really knew about it. So I think that it will be rolled out as a feature for payment inside their tools, and it'll be very interesting to see if it can challenge something like Apple Money, because until it really operates like a credit card and you could use it within Apple Pay, or there's a credit card on your phone you can tap and go, or you can use it as a one-click payment from within your browser, which is probably where Facebook and WhatsApp will be going. You know, Venmo style, if you send a request to someone to pay. That kind of rails makes sense. And applying for a payment license from FINMA in Switzerland is an important step of doing that, because it's the Liberate Association recognizing that they'll need that license in order to act as a proper payment rails. So the way forward for Libra, in my view, is to position itself as a payment system and to bring in as much decentralized features as possible, while still staying within this permissioned state, so that regulators are happy, so they can harness the benefit, because not everything in blockchain has to be completely decentralized. All of the consensus groups that sit around permission blockchains are still reaping massive benefits. There is no need for supply chains to be completely public and on an open ledger, in my view. There's others who say that should be the case, but that's just nuts. No farmer is going to put all of their information for their competitors to see on a public blockchain just to be part of a supply chain that might save a little money. They will consider being part of a permissioned private supply chain if they see value. And a lot of early blockchain pioneers love that revolutionary aspect of blockchain, but I'm much more of an evolutionist to say you've got to give the end user value to get them on board. So Libra's biggest challenge, I think, is showing value. And in Australia, we have a real-time payment system that's been in place for about a year now, which is so fast that it probably is one of the biggest hurdles to serious digital asset and central bank digital currency adoption, because where's the value that's coming from super fast payments if your traditional system has already been upgraded to give you near instantaneous bank to bank? We don't have that overnight payment settlement. You can have literally real-time systems under the new payment platform, which most of our major banks are on, and is starting to become more standardized. So it's very interesting to see that projects like that may have been pushed out a little faster, and other countries will certainly be looking to improve their payment system, perhaps in part to, you know, head off the risk that people will be moving to cryptocurrency-based systems or digital currency-based systems.
That's interesting. So the super fast payment system is usurping some of the benefits that one would expect to get from blockchain and cryptocurrencies.
I certainly think so.
Wow,
why would you want to learn about private keys and things like that if you can pay someone in real time, when really that's the biggest friction of a lot of payment rails, is how long does it take? And that's always been a bit of friction around Bitcoin. And you know, Bitcoin Cash was designed to try and do some things and get some things done faster. And that's always a balance of how fast can you get the transactions through.
That's true. And also, and the ease, going back to the earlier comments, is that I'm going to use my card, and if my card can, or my phone can do the translations for me, that's it. I'm sold. I don't want to know about keys, and I don't want to bother about them. And if I'm paying for something, you said at the very start of this conversation, I want to pay for whatever the price is that I'm used to paying, and whether it's euros or Aussie dollars, whatever, and I could be paying in Bitcoin Cash, but I don't care. I just want to know what the amount is. So I think you're dead right there. Finally, for this week, or for this call, a good news story about a hack that sort of came back again. Tell me about the lendef.me hack, and how did the money come back?
So this was a recent hack on a decentralized application. It was a vulnerability in the lending protocol for lendef.me, which was operated by DeForce Foundation. So a hacker went in and managed to exploit a vulnerability, and this is a big problem in smart contracts, which is what scares a lot of people from using them. Is the code must be open, so anyone can look at it and find a vulnerability, but that's why it needs to be sort of aircraft or nuclear plant grade code. So the specific exploit hasn't been revealed publicly, and often the case is that that's because it's being patched. But some certain people have speculated that there was an incompatibility in certain ERC 777 tokens and the smart contracts, so that they could do something called a re-entrancy attack, which I didn't know what that meant either.
Say a word again. What is it?
A re-entrancy attack. So it effectively allows a loop for the withdrawal of funds without the smart contract properly recognizing that it's just paying out money from a pool. So what happened was the hackers took the money and then were in communication with one of the founders of DeForce. And that was interesting. But what was more interesting out of it is that some of the funds that were withdrawn went through a known exchange. So there was a bit of a leaking of the IP address of the hacker, and transactions were initiated from an account which was labeled lendef.me hack. And so communications happened where there was a bit of tracing possible. And this is in part because digital currency exchanges have started IDing people under Know Your Customers and these different AML directives, certainly around the European Union, they run under that. So it was possible to get some more identification of the hacker. So the DFOS Foundation had said, well, we're just going to provide your details to the police. And that external threat appears to have then resulted in almost all, it's a bit unclear, possibly due to currency movements, whether or not everything was returned, but pretty much everything was returned from the address called the lendf.me hack address. So
Happy
this
endings.
is really interesting. That's right. And as distinct from other hacks where there's been a fork or something, like in the DAO hack in 2016, or people around the Parity Wallet hack proposing forks to return the funds, this was something that did involve a third-party authority. That threat saying, oh, I'm going to report you to the police, then going, oh crap, we are not as anonymous behind our keyboard as we thought, thus returning the money and probably resulting in it not being reported to the police at all, or the poor police who got it, who said, we have no idea what this is, being told, don't worry, the money came back. May very well have said, that's great, we don't have to do anything anymore. Or do you really want to pursue this? To which the answer would almost certainly be not really, because they just want to get back to apologizing to their members and sorting out whose money needs to go where. So it's a very nice, happy ending to happen so fast, because the whole thing happened within the space of a week.
Wow, because normally, obviously, with hacks, you hear about it and they're gone, and exchanges, it's the you feel sorry for people who keep their coins on exchanges. I know they're not meant to, but that's, I guess, that's probably the first happy ending I've heard of a hack.
Well, I guess the DAO hack still theoretically had a happy ending.
And it would, even with the Mt. Gox, didn't, because of the movement in Bitcoin, and the people who lost all their money, they're getting the same money back, not what it would be worth now, but the value. Isn't that right? They're getting the value.
Yes, there's quite an argument on that. So I've written a few lengthy pieces. I did one on I think it was the 6th year anniversary of the hack. So it was around the issue of under insolvency law in Japan, as I understand it, which is very similar to Australian or certainly UK or Irish insolvency law. There's a question of, do you value the claim at the date of the insolvency, where Bitcoin was obviously vastly lower price, or do you consider the Bitcoin that was inside the company at that time being held on trust, so that of the Bitcoin that's recovered, each person who had an account there should be given, in proportion to their holdings, some of it back. And of course, getting some of that Bitcoin back on current prices is a vastly better proposition than getting perhaps 1/20th of that value, which would be the dollar value back then. And what was really interesting about that hack with Mt. Gox is the shareholders of Mt. Gox quite publicly said, we would like the trust approach of the Bitcoin being held, because we don't want it, because under insolvency law, anything left over after the creditors are paid out goes to the shareholders, who are already being sued by people who had Bitcoin there. And they just knew that if it was given to them, they would just be sued, and all the administrative pain of having to figure out who was owed what would fall on them. So everybody, it seems, in the entire arrangement would love to get people back their original Bitcoin. And I think it's heading in that way. It's just taken a lot longer than expected. But insolvency law is a slow process when there's court supervision, and the Japanese legal process and courts have never been accused of being fast. In Australia, we're quite lucky. My home state of New South Wales is one of the top 3 litigious jurisdictions in the world, and everyone thinks that's because we sue each other a lot, but it's not. It's because our courts are so fast. In the Supreme Court of New South Wales, certain lists have a 1-year turnaround to completion of the entire matter, and the judges are really strict about getting it through. And we have a great deal of technological use that's through the roof with COVID. So we now have, as of last week, digital witnessing of legal documents is in place, and all kinds of video court hearings are being conducted. But just generally, Australia is very ahead on e-court. So a lot of the litigation in Australia comes to my hometown of Sydney, which is great. Hopefully we're going to see, to the extent they have to go to court, more of these digital law matters here, which I'm really excited about. It might drag me back into a whole lot more litigation.
That's exciting. I didn't realize it. Wow. I love the fact fast, because we mentioned before we went on air, I went through divorce and also bankruptcy too as well. It took so long and it cost so much. It was just crazy stuff. It makes no sense, because once, like with divorce, I'll say this very briefly, if you're divorced, bang, you don't need to spend our years arguing the toss, because if it's gone, it's gone. Wow. Okay. That's
right.
Fascinating look into the world of Michael Bacina. And your view. I'm very interested. Actually, I love I really particularly enjoyed listening to you about your views on Libra and Binance and Happy Hack. So let's do this again. I'd like to find out more about what you're thinking. So thank you very much again. If people want to follow you, Michael, what's the best place to follow you?
LinkedIn is my network of choice. Everyone uses their real names there. So please feel free to connect with me. I would only ask that you send a message when you do the connection request, because I do get quite a few still. And I try and prioritize the people who've written a message because they've taken a little bit of extra effort other than just hitting connect. And I try to message people back who connect with me. So I'm quite available on LinkedIn. It's quite interesting. That's probably a social media platform where I've seen a huge amount of work come in the last 3 years. And prior to that time, I really hadn't seen a lot of digital generation of work. But that I guess is the space we're working when we're practicing in the digital law space, which is only going to get bigger, which is exciting. So I'm always happy to have a chat on LinkedIn. And of course, these days, Zoom calls are the new coffee. Yeah. So while I'm always happy to have a coffee, happy to have a digital coffee as well.
Perfect. And just so I'm pronouncing your name correctly, it's Bacina, but it's spelled Bacina for people listening who can't
That's
see
correct.
the video. So Michael, spelled normally, and then Bacina, Bacina.
That's correct.
Brilliant. Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much
for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. We'll do it again soon.
Fantastic.